On November 18, 2020, the Decatur Police Department in Decatur, Alabama, received a phone call that the switchboard did not know where to direct. Eventually, it was transferred to Detective Sean McGuinness of the Violent Crime Unit. The first words the caller said to him were, "I want to confess to a murder I did years ago." Detective McGuinness was of course skeptical of the unsolicited murder confession, thinking it was at best a prank and at worst was part of a setup for an ambush, as the caller wanted to meet with him. The caller initially did little to help convince the detective of the veracity of his confession, as he could not remember the day or the year the homicide he claimed to have committed occurred. Detective McGuinness had to consult a chart the department maintained of local homicides committed from the 1980s onward, in order to use the other details the caller provided to try to identify the case he was confessing to. He ultimately narrowed down the case to a murder that occurred in 1995. 26-year-old Christopher Alvin Dailey had been last seen alive on April 25, 1995, around 3:20 in the afternoon at the Huntsville Hilton Hotel. He worked as a server at the hotel and was there that day to attend an employee meeting. He told an acquaintance that he was going to meet someone in Decatur, but did not say their name or why he was going to meet them. Christopher's family reported him missing the following day around 3 p.m., but would later learn that he had been located, but not identified, an hour before they made their report. Two 17-year-olds, a boy and a girl, had been out looking for leaves for the girls' leaf collection when they found Christopher's body approximately 25 feet off of George Russell Road, along what had previously been used as a logging road. He had been shot once in the head. Less than 2 hours later, Christopher's 1983 Toyota Tercel was found partially submerged in the Tennessee River in an industrial park, 4 miles away from where his body was found. A rock had been tied to the vehicle's accelerator, and Christopher's wallet and identification were still inside of the car. Police could not establish a motive or identify any suspects in the case despite their best efforts, and the case went cold quickly. It was re-examined several times over the years, but no major breaks came in the case until the phone call in November of 2020. The man who made that call was 53-year-old Johnny Dwight Whited. Whited had a series of arrests on his record for traffic and drug offenses. At the time of the phone call, he was out on bond for felony possession of methamphetamine. He had been 28 at the time of Christopher's murder, and his wife had filed for divorce from him just 8 days before the murder occurred. Less than a month after it, Whited had pled guilty to a drug paraphernalia charge. Detective McGuinness was still somewhat skeptical of Whited's confession after the phone call, despite the details he had provided over the phone, but still agreed to meet with him. He and several other members of the police department met with Whited, who gave Detective McGuinness directions to the scene where Christopher's car had been put into the river, from the backseat of a patrol car. A gate that had not been built in 1995 prevented them from driving all the way to the scene, but Whited was able to show them the last quarter of a mile of the way on foot. In his description of how the vehicle was put into the river, he was able to provide details that Detective McGuinness believed only the person who had put the car there and the crime scene technicians who had removed it would have been able to know. During this meeting, Whited also accurately reenacted the crime and provided further details that matched up with the details of the murder. These details were what finally fully convinced Detective McGuinness that Whited's confession was genuine. According to Detective McGuinness, Whited apologized multiple times for the murder. He seemed embarrassed, and as though the murder had been weighing heavily on him. This, of course, does not lessen his responsibility in the crime, or change the fact that he remained silent for more than 2 decades. It's not an excuse, Detective McGuinness told the Washington Post. He killed somebody. He should have come forward all those years ago. Whited finally confessed to the murders after 25 years because he is terminally ill with stage 4 lung cancer and wanted to clear his conscience before he meets his maker. Detective McGuinness discussed the motive of the crime with Whited, but could not publicly disclose it so as to protect the pending legal case against Whited, who has been charged with Christopher's murder. He was able to say that Christopher and Whited had not met each other prior to the murder. Whited was released from the Morgan County Jail on November 29, 2020, after posting $15,000 bail. His court-appointed attorney, Griff Belzer, believes that the bail amount, low for the serious nature of the Class A felony he has been charged with, was approved by a judge because of his client's ties to the community and his declining health. A preliminary hearing has not yet been set, and Whited's lawyer is unsure if Whited will want him to file for one. "It's a strange set of facts and circumstances surrounding this case," Griff Belzer said after his client's release. "Even though he has confessed, I am going to defend him like I would any other client in a murder case. He is innocent until proven guilty." Christopher Dailey's surviving family members were made aware of Whited's confession and arrest. They had been losing faith that the case would ever be solved, and are grateful and relieved to finally have answers. Fawn Cox was a student at Northeast High School in Kansas City, Missouri. She was an active member at the Sheffield Assembly of God Church, where she participated in numerous youth activities. In the summer of 1989, the 16-year-old was working as a cashier at Worlds of Fun, a local amusement park. On the night of July 25th, she arrived at her home on East 9th Street after her shift at work, spoke with her parents, and went upstairs to go to sleep around 11 p.m., as she had to be back at work the following morning. The next day, Fawn's alarm sounded as it normally did on days when she had to go to work, but she did not turn it off. Her mother and her younger sister Felisa went into her room to see why she was not waking up. Felisa went over to her sister's bed to try to shake her awake, but Fawn did not stir. She was deceased. Fawn's autopsy would later show that she had been raped and strangled. Several small electronic devices were missing from her room, leading police to investigate the possibility that Fawn had been attacked during a robbery. They believed her killer had entered her second-story bedroom through a window, potentially climbing on top of a truck parked behind the house to reach it. Fawn shared her bedroom with one of her sisters, but had been the only member of her family sleeping upstairs on the night of her death. Her parents and sisters had been sleeping downstairs because they had air conditioning units on the main floor. None of them heard any of the noise from the attack during the night, potentially because of the noise generated by the air conditioning units. The only unusual thing they noticed that night was the agitated behavior of the family dog, which they had simply attributed to the fact that she was pregnant at the time. 3 arrests were made in the case within a month of the murder. 2 of the suspects were juveniles. At least one of the suspects remained in jail for 8 months until the case against him fell apart. The witness whose testimony led to the arrests admitted that they had lied to the police, and the charges against all 3 suspects were dropped. The killer's DNA was found at the crime scene in semen and in hairs. As technology progressed over the years, the DNA profile from that evidence was able to exclude the 3 original suspects, as well as several others. No match to it was ever found in any criminal database. By 2019, as genetic genealogy was solving cases all over the country, the Cox family questioned why the new technology was not being used in Fawn's case. As happy as they were that so many families were finding the answers they had spent 3 decades chasing, they did not see why the same technique could not be used in Fawn's case when a DNA profile was available. The Kansas City Police Department had not used genetic genealogy in the case because of a lack of funding. Fawn's family therefore began fundraising to cover the cost, hosting a motorcycle ride, t-shirt sales, auctions, and pool tournaments. However, the police would not accept the funds. According to Sergeant Jake Bakina, the department had to serve everyone equally, and could not allow certain cases to receive more advanced tests over other cases based on a family's ability to pay for them. The Cox family argued that the money should be accepted because it wasn't theirs. It had been contributed by the community at large. Kansas City police began looking into federal grants that could be used to cover the cost. Eventually, the FBI took on the cost of using genetic genealogy in Fawn's case, and in November of 2020, Fawn's murder became the first case in Kansas City solved using genetic genealogy. Fawn's killer was identified as her own cousin, Donald Cox Jr., who had been 21 at the time of Fawn's murder. He had died of an overdose in 2006. His death was ultimately found to not be the result of foul play, but had initially been treated as suspicious. The medical examiner had therefore opened an investigation and saved a blood sample from his autopsy. DNA was extracted from that sample to confirm that Donald's DNA was a match to that found at the crime scene. The Cox family's relief at finally having Fawn's killer identified was of course complicated by feelings of betrayal, as Fawn had been taken from them by someone within their own family. However, when the Kansas City Police Department notified Fawn's parents of the identification, they did say that they had occasionally suspected their nephew of being involved in the crime over the years. "It's a relief that there's closure," said Felisa Cox after the announcement was made. "The answers aren't always what we were asking for, but there's closure." Siobhan McGuinness was, according to her father, a genius who spoke perfect English by the time she turned 4. She was also a happy and outgoing child who was always smiling. On February 5, 1974, the 5-year-old went to a friend's house to play. She then began the short walk back to her home, less than 3 blocks away, in the north side of Missoula, Montana. She never arrived and was reported missing. A massive search for Siobhan began, utilizing law enforcement, search dogs, and over 100 volunteers. The effort was complicated by heavy snow that fell the day after her disappearance. On February 7th, 2 days after Siobhan went missing, her body was found in a snowy drainage culvert near the Tura exit of Interstate 90, east of Missoula. Her autopsy would reveal that she had been sexually assaulted and sustained a head injury and 2 stab wounds to the chest. Police investigated several suspects, including a 15-year-old boy who underwent a lie detector test and questioning under the influence of sodium amytal before being cleared. Police identified a vehicle that was potentially connected to the case, a green Cadillac with New York state license plates, but never located it. Despite an exhaustive investigation involving multiple law enforcement agencies, the case ultimately went cold. Samples from Siobhan's rape kit were thankfully properly stored following her murder, and they would provide authorities with the killer's DNA profile once technology advanced to the point where it was possible to extract it. It was run through criminal databases, but no match was ever found. The Missoula City Police, the Missoula County Sheriff's Office, the Missoula County Attorney's Office, the Montana Department of Justice, and the FBI would all contribute to the investigation over the years. In 2019, Missoula Police began working with the Cold Case Squad at the Missoula County Sheriff's Office to explore other ways of using the DNA evidence to solve Siobhan's case. They worked with Othram Incorporated to use genetic genealogy in the case, an effort which eventually led investigators to a potential suspect. That suspect's children were contacted, and they provided DNA samples for comparison, which confirmed that the suspect was the contributor of the DNA from Siobhan's rape kit. On October 26, 2020, more than 46 years after Siobhan's murder, Missoula Police Chief Jason White announced during a virtual press conference that DNA had identified Richard William Davis as the suspect in the case. In addition to the DNA evidence, police learned that Davis had driven a green Cadillac with New York plates in 1974, and photographs of him from that time period were consistent with descriptions given by 2 eyewitnesses. Davis could not be arrested, however, because he had died in 2012 at the age of 70 in Cabot, Arkansas, where he had lived since the late 1980s. Davis was a born-again Christian and had worked for years as a truck driver. He was survived by a wife, 4 daughters, 9 grandchildren, and a great-granddaughter upon his death. His family has cooperated with the investigation and reached out to Siobhan's family. During their virtual press conference announcing the resolution of the case, Siobhan's half-sister Una, appearing through video conference, requested that the public show Davis's widow and daughters the same kindness they have shown her family, and respect their privacy during this difficult time. The family of the suspect are very, 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 very kind people, Una said. They did not have to cooperate or care about these things, but they were willing to do this for us, and they have reached out to us. They sent a very lovely statement to our family from theirs, and they are also experiencing their own new family tragedy. Authorities do not know why Davis was in Missoula in 1974 and believe he may have just simply been passing through. He lived and worked all across the United States during the 1960s and 70s. He was a missionary on the Sioux Reservation and later a mine worker in South Dakota in the 1960s, a school bus driver in Alaska in the mid-70s, and a security guard at the Arkansas School for the Deaf and Blind in the late 1970s and early 1980s, when he was also a volunteer with Big Brothers Big Sisters. He is also known to have lived in Pennsylvania and New York, and to have traveled extensively to numerous other states. While Davis has no known criminal convictions, he had previously been connected to other crimes. After authorities in Missoula notified the Village of Bath Police Department in Bath, New York, of Davis's connection to Siobhan's murder, they reopened one of their own cases. 24-year-old Barbara Jean Alexievich disappeared in 1973, when Davis was living in Bath and working at a local dairy. Davis was known to police because of several alleged incidents of attempted child lurings, including an attempted abduction of an 8-year-old girl the same year Barbara went missing. Barbara and her husband had been at the local Elks Lodge on the night of October 3, 1973, and she left the establishment to walk the 2 blocks to their home alone. She has never been seen again. Police are asking anyone with information about Davis during his time in Bath or Barbara Alexievich's disappearance to contact them. Shortly after the announcement of the identification of Davis, Siobhan's family announced plans to memorialize her in Missoula. The Zootown Arts Community Center is currently raising funds to create a rooftop garden in Siobhan's memory, which Siobhan's mother hopes will serve as a place that will bring the entire community together. If they are unable to execute the rooftop garden as planned, any funds that are raised will be used to create an alternative memorial.